Okay. So today's class, I really am excited about because there's been a lot happening in the last 45 days. As you're probably aware, the storm kind of came, it caused us a lot of disruption for the first couple of weeks after it. And now we're kind of dealing with a little bit of the fallout, but it's starting to become more clear as to what's next. What has value, what are people interested in, and where are the pressure points? And one of the things that has come up recently is, how do we disclose this to new buyers? How do we market the property? How do we going back to being a salesman? What do we do to sell? And that's really, really tricky. I've got an example that I want to share with you. Let's look here. This is a listing that they're trying to put on the market. I'm not going to tell what it is, but here's where it is, and I'm showing it right now. The most desirable location in one of the most sought after communities in Naples, 2 blocks to the beach, 1 block to the Ritz-Carlton. Oversized lot with beautiful trees. This property is being sold as is. No HOA fees or rental restrictions. One of a kind opportunity to invest and own in Naples. Come and see for yourself. Minutes to shopping and great restaurants. Separately, confidential information. Please submit all offers on a NABOR contract with proof of funds. All information is deemed to be correct, but not guaranteed or warranted. Agents and their buyers are advised to commence their own due diligence. The listing is subject to errors, omissions, and changes. This information should be independently verified before any person enters into a transaction based upon it. Property is being sold as is. So that's two things. I was sent that as an example, and the listing agent said, hey, can you help me figure out what to do with this? And, is this enough? Can you tell? Here's my question. Can you tell whether this property was flooded by that description? I don't think you can. There are some little tidbits after I tell you that maybe pick out, hey, it's being sold as is and it's great location. They don't talk about the house at all, really. And that's really my first comment, is that you've got a house, you've got this big gorilla in the room. You don't want to be accused of kind of skirting around what we're dealing with. My feedback on this one was, be a little bit clearer as to what this property is and the condition that it's in currently. So they have this section here that says this property is being sold as is. The listing agent understands what that means, but you probably have to do the spousal test. You look to your spouse or your partner and you say, what do you think? What does this make you think of? And I like the spousal test because your spouse usually doesn't have any context. They're not a part of your communications before. They don't know about this particular property, or maybe they do, but it's a little bit, they have this unbiased, this macro view of it. And to me, the spousal test says you got to be a little bit clear. So this property is being sold as is, as it was damaged in the storm, right? It doesn't sound that bad when you really think about it. It's clear. It's everyone would understand it. You could also say something along the lines of, this property is subject to building code restrictions imposed by FEMA. You could say it without being as direct, but you do want to tell people, hey, this home is not something that you can just walk in and put some lipstick on it and get it working condition. It needs to be renovated. And so my point to the listing agent was, maybe we should just say that. Just be very clear, cut through it. It's, this property is being sold for lot value only, something along those lines. And I know you guys are probably coming up with these same questions. It's something that is a challenge to all of us. How do we sell without kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, but also not get ourselves into hot water, not waste our time or kind of cause any problems with that? Dad, I see that you're on there. Have you seen this over the years? You've gone through, all the hurricanes over the years. Is this something that you would advise, or would you do it a little differently?
Can you hear me all right, Chris?
I can hear, we just can't see you.
Yeah, I would flat disclose it. I think it's a selling opportunity. And in my experience, most sellers don't want to do a seller's disclosure. They look at it as a negative, a pain in the rear end. Why should I have to tell them anything? And it's a way to carve your property out from the herd by saying, yes, we got flooding in the garage, but the main body of the house is fine. And if you had a few repair items, here are the invoices. So it's crystal clear. We run into trouble when the realtor is the one saying everything's fine. We had a leak and we fixed it, it's fine. Give them the invoice. But it's definitely the elephant in the room. I love the spousal test. I employ it myself with pretty much everything I do. If my wife doesn't,
you and I talk about that a lot.
well, they're normal people. We're realtors and lawyers. Your market is a normal human being, not realtors and lawyers. So that's huge.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. All right, great. So the other, so we've gone into the description. Dad, you and I talked about this earlier. Disclosures. I kind of got an alarm bell went off recently because I've heard recently that more and more sellers are just saying, well, we're not filling out a disclosure, especially after this storm. And that really confused me. Dad, can you kind of highlight what the disclosure is meant to do? Why do we even bother with this? And why is this even more of a reason to do it?
It started with the latent material defects, Johnson v. Davis. And then, since I've been the attorney for, the real estate company for so long, it evolved, I think, to eliminate a whole bunch of questions realtors and brokers got post-closing, and not including lawsuits. If you disclose something up front before the closing and they close, you avoid a whole lot of litigation. And God knows, I've been party to $80,000 settlements over termites, things that could have been easily dealt with if they just disclosed it up front. But, I think the realtors go to seminars where the lawyers are saying, you only have to disclose this. Well, the lawyers tell you the minimum, but you're the salesperson and you have to determine as a salesperson whether or not, just because I don't have to, is it better sales wise if I over disclose? Does it create more comfort? Does it protect me? Does it protect my client? Is it going to eliminate 4,000 phone calls post-closing because they found out the garbage disposal was broken and they just ticked off that you didn't tell them about it? It's safe. So I think the form came about just to eliminate all the BS brokers and realtors went through post-closing. Because if you look at it, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be a latent material defect. But this is stuff that comes up day in and day out, and it wastes everybody's time and it gets them in trouble. And they have an unhappy client who's not going to send them more work.
Well, and I think there's a liability that the seller has if they do nothing. Filling out the disclosure removes that liability and puts it onto the buyer. And it's just, hey, look, I either know or I don't know about a certain item. Here's my answer to that. And if I do know, I'll disclose it. If I don't know, then no harm, no foul. I'm just, there was no liability. We're just being clear about it. It's a way to communicate, and it's a very effective tool to protect your client. We used to see it, Dad, a lot in fix and flips. So if you buy a property, you put some renovation into it, and then you quickly sell it. Those people typically tell you, I'm not filling out a disclosure. I know nothing about the property. I never lived there. Doesn't work that way. You put what you do know. Anything you do. If you don't know, there's a box. He says, I do not know. So alternatively, if you're uncomfortable filling out the full seller's disclosure, you write it out. You bullet point, here's what we know about the property. And that way you don't feel like you're going to be forced to answer a question you're uncomfortable answering. You just, we're aware of, the roof was replaced, there were leaks in the bathroom, the HVAC, is faulty, or, there are 3 permits for prior work. And you don't have to fill out the form, but you got to fill out something. You want to disclose just to take that liability off.
Well, there's a psychology of it too. If you think, in my experience anyways, I get more buyers who get ticked off because they feel like they're being played, that the seller knew about this, they kept it to themselves. If you just told me about it up front, they would have been fine with it. But, they're wealthy people, and to be played or maneuvered or manipulated really offends a lot of buyers. So you want to eliminate that. And then also, when you have that initial infatuation with a property, you tend to get away with a lot more disclosures. It's sort of when you're at a dance and you ask that girl to dance, you overlook a ton of things. because you're in that zone.
Yep.
And the zone of looking at a new car, whatever it is, that's the time to disclose, when they're in the zone.
Yeah. And you have that ability, that time to pitch it the right way to,
Yes.
hey, yes, there's a permit, but it was for the old HVAC, or it's just for a fence, or it's just the irrigation, or hey, there's a permit for a leak in the roof, but that's been fixed, here's the invoice. And that's the opportunity the buyer would have, say, oh, I don't like that. But at that point, that early stage, they're still trying to get you under contract. They still want the opportunity to buy them. So they will rationalize taking over that permit.
There's a big difference if they hear it from you versus somebody else. Huge difference.
All right, so this is the part that I think is a lot of fun. Advice for the buyer, advice for the seller. If we're looking at properties that may have been damaged in the storm, or it's, there's just a lot that's been going on, what can I tell a buyer to say, go do this? Number one, as is contract, whether you're using a FAR bar or neighbor, as is gives you rights to walk away if there's something that you don't like. Even if you can't really put your finger on it, if it doesn't seem right, you could cancel and get your money back. That is the simplest thing. And then once you get it under contract and you have that free look, that due diligence period, ask a million questions from anyone that'll pick up the phone after you call them. So a little bit of context, I used to build subdivisions with a developer, and we had a due diligence checklist, and I always had at the top of the list, ask all questions from everybody. That was something we did on every deal. And so I would call the county, hey, what do I need to know to move in tomorrow? What do I need to know to get construction started tomorrow? Can I pull a building permit tomorrow? If you ask those open-ended questions, that the very specific but pretty vague in sense of like where the question will go, that's what a buyer needs. The buyer needs to know, hey, my goal is to move my family in by the end of the month. Can I do that? County, do you have any problems with that? Inspector, are there any problems with that? Water service, seller, listing agent, would there be any problems with me moving in by the end of the year with, pulling permits? Could I pull a permit on this today? That's really, really key. Ask all questions, call everybody. Very key. Secondarily, sellers. What can I tell a seller? Say what you know, and if you don't know, say you don't know. That you'll stay safe if you do that. Tell them what you know, and if you don't know, tell them you don't know. But staying silent or avoiding the issue or avoiding the question isn't going to help you much. You've got to be clear, transparent about that. Is there, Dad, any other advice that you might have?
Well, again, the buyer's going to find out anyways. And the degree of anger is exponentially increased if you don't tell them, because the inference is they feel like you think they're stupid. And that's really offensive. Yeah. So if they're going to find out anyways, it's way better coming from your mouth than them finding out on their own. And it can help facilitate the closing. They trust you more. Everything goes smoother. If you have to stay an extra week, they're more readily able to agree to it. So I don't see the point in not telling. And I see it being very, very harmful if you don't. And in this crowd, post Ian, if you don't mention that, hey, we had a hurricane and here's how my property suffered, it's crazy, really.
Well, and then it goes even further. Let's say you're buying a condo, the unit was unaffected, but the building itself probably was. You could ask the seller all day long, what issues do you see coming up? Does the property manager have any questions? And then you go call the property manager. When you file your application, you ask the property manager, are there any proposed special assessments coming up? Is there any board meeting minutes that I can review? What can I expect over the next 12 months regarding, any damage or anything that's coming down the pipeline? Ask those broad, open-ended questions, and that's part of your due diligence. Now, you may not want to do it before you get it under contract. I would always recommend get it under contract first, then do your exhaustive search, get all your questions answered. All right, so now moving on to the part that I think is a lot of fun about this class. and I keep looking at my whiteboard, that's why I'm looking over there. Negotiating last minute deals. Now this one's fun. Dad, you've done this your whole career, so I'll lean into a lot on this one. But we've had a lot of deals recently. These are not necessarily storm related. These are more typical deals. It's something that we can use across the board. And let's say that tensions have been rising slowly but surely. People are getting frustrated with each other. You have buyers, you have sellers, agents, maybe an inspector's involved, lawyers, and at some point someone's getting frustrated and someone says no, or they ask too much and they push someone to their breaking point. What can we do? So I'm going to give you an example. We had a deal yesterday, and we've had a lot of these deals recently, unfortunately, where tensions have built up so much that they are not even communicating anymore, not effectively at least. They're picking up the phone angry, they're hanging up angry. And so not really listening. They're not finding solutions. And that's really the key. So the example from yesterday's closing, very expensive property, almost $3 million. And the seller agreed to do certain repairs. Now, the key on all of this is that the seller believes they already discounted the property. So it was listed for well over 3 million. Now it's just under 3 million. And the seller's like, look, I'm taking a discount. I don't want to do all these extra repairs. This is just costing me more and more money. So the seller's frustration is getting higher. The buyer doesn't see themselves as getting a deal. They just made a good offer and it was accepted. So when they see something wrong, they say, hey, I didn't know about this little leak or this drywall issue. I want these things fixed. And so this tension builds up because the buyer doesn't understand why the seller is so frustrated. And the seller thinks the buyer should be more understanding. And they stop talking. And then the agents get frustrated because they're trying to communicate. They're trying to help, but it's not working. Their clients are getting more angry. So what can we do? And so yesterday when we had this issue, it'd been brewing for maybe a week. The seller had done repairs. It didn't work. So there's step one. The seller needs to know if the repairs they did were done. Even though they paid for it, doesn't mean it's done. The paying for it doesn't matter as much. And so step one, know that you have to verify it was done correctly. Don't assume that it was done correctly. And I think that's one thing that the listing agent probably could have done better in this case, which was be there when the work was completed and test it out. The sellers, and a lot of our clients are out of town for many of these closings. So we can't take on that liability that we're saying it was done perfectly, but we need to see it for ourselves. Hey, I was there, we did a water test, we didn't see leaks. I think it's okay, but I'm going to, let the professionals advise, I won't say anything more than that. That would have been really, really great. And then separately, when the buyer did their final walkthrough, obviously that's a very key thing. But I've seen a lot of buyers waive their walkthrough rights. They're just not coming for that final walkthrough. And I think that breeds its own frustrations and missed opportunities. So in yesterday's deal, there was a roof leak. There were some screen shutters and things that needed to be replaced. And the seller had hired someone, thought it was done, and it wasn't. And so when the buyer came in, they said, well, the seller didn't do what they were supposed to. And they got very angry. They asked for an escrow. And it was $5,000. It was going to allow the seller to get the same roofer to come back out and get it fixed, which is the right of the buyer under the contract. But the seller refused. The seller said, I don't think that's reasonable. I'm not doing an escrow. So Dad, I'll bring you in at this point. How do you kind of merge those things? How do you bridge the gap? What can we do to kind of help the agents know when is the right time to call us? When can we help? What can we do?
If the agent is being asked to do the walkthrough, that's a huge no-no. We've had agents sued and agents write checks because they did walkthroughs and missed things. I think of one lady in particular, she missed a leaky skylight. And you're deemed to be an expert because you're a realtor. So you doing the walkthrough is bad. Secondly, if you can get the inspection company to do the walkthrough for an extra $150, that's huge. I always tell my buyers that inspection company be a lovely witness if the seller didn't do the walkthrough and you ended up in a big fight at closing that wasn't resolved, which, we almost always get rid of those fights. But if you have a disinterested third party who's licensed to do exactly this, who did the inspection to start with, so they know exactly where to go to look to see if it was rectified, that takes all the responsibility off the realtor's shoulders for, I want to say it's $100 to $200. If they're already, so that's, you really need to do that. Use your team that you have, and then the inspection company is part of the team. That's very helpful. Thirdly, the people who don't want to do a walkthrough, I point out the other three things that the walkthrough clause is for, and make sure everything is still there, because I've had too many cases where people take out pillars off the front of the house, or they take out lights that are fixtures, or they take out a refrigerator of the garage, or they get, it might be customary in South Dakota, but it's not customary in Florida. And then I try to quantify it in dollars and cents. Is this $100 issue, Vinny? Is this a $2,000 issue, Vinny? Are we going to kill somebody over $100? And if you're looking at a $2 million deal and they're getting all excited over $100, once they look at the $100, it tends to be less emotional.
Well, I think the key point in that situation is there does need a lot of times to be another voice.
Oh God, yeah.
A fresh voice, someone new.
They should call us all the time, because the strategy, if the people are people, and I always ask what part of the country they're from, because people have different personalities depending where they're from, different expectations depending upon where they're from. I mean, you and I have enough family who practice law in other parts of this country that we know how things go in New Jersey. We know how things go in New York. And if you know that, then you know what advice to give the realtor about the walkthrough.
Yeah. And one of the big things that tends to help a lot is someone says, when you ask the question, where are you from? Is, oh, I'm from, New Jersey, or I'm from Michigan, or I'm from California. And we say, oh, yes, we're aware. That is how they do it up there, but it is a bit different. Let me explain. Yeah. And it's a breath of fresh air to the equation, because we get to take the focus off of you as the agent. The focus comes off of you, it comes onto us. They tend to, at the very least, give us the benefit of the doubt until they hear something they don't want. But it tends to help a lot. And that's what happened yesterday. Is we got on the phone and we just tried to problem solve. I talked to the buyer, and the buyer says, "Oh, the seller is an a-hole." And I'm like, okay, I understand. That sounds awful. And I talked to the other side. Oh, the seller's an a-hole. It's like, yes, absolutely, I understand. And we listen, we propose solutions, then we give our advice, but we empower them to decide for themselves. And all along, you're there with us. And if it's working for you, if that helps, that's what we're here for. We're here to give, even if it's just you, let me give you a fresh perspective. Let me help you out in that sense. And if that means coming in person and just kind of laying it all on the table, if it means a three-way conference call, that sort of thing, we can normalize tensions. We can kind of say, yes, that's unfair, but it's normal. And if that's something we can offer to you and your clients, that's what we like to do. So please keep us in mind for that.
You're letting them vent to somebody who doesn't have the accumulated emotional baggage that you might have.
Oh, we've got emotional baggage, but it's not on your deal.
Yeah, it's not in your deal. I got my own baggage.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that deal, as an example on that one, it ended up closing yesterday. What we proposed, what I got on the phone with everybody, and what we proposed was that instead of a $5,000 credit, because the seller refused to do it, let's figure out what the priority really is. Is it, let's close right now, today, or let's wait a week, let the seller fix everything so she doesn't have to do a seller credit or an escrow agreement. And the buyer said, no, my priority is closing today. I said, fine. So if we close today, seller won't give you the escrow. That I can get them to maybe agree in writing that they'll complete it, but there's no money there in the event they don't. He said, that's fine, that meets my priorities. My preference is to close today The roof issue was secondary. And I gave them that perspective and said, if it was the other way around, if your priority was making sure that you had zero risk, then we would extend. That's something the seller had agreed to. And I think personally, and I think we're patting ourselves on the back a little bit, so bear with me. We were handling both sides of that deal. And I do get a lot of questions that I'm curious to hear what your opinion is or how you explain this to clients. But occasionally we'll be asked to handle both sides. And one of them will ask, what does that mean for me if you're representing both sides? My answer, and then I'll let you answer, Dad. My answer is, we represent the transaction. We have the contract, we have the terms, we have our advice. And if the buyer calls me and says, what does line 336 mean? I will answer it. And if the seller calls and says, what does line 336 mean? I'll answer it. But our job is to get clear title. For the seller, I'll get clear title. I'll draft their documents, make sure they get paid. And for the buyer, I'll make sure that they get clear title, that the seller does everything that they were obligated to do before they get paid. And in that sense, it works. And yesterday, it worked particularly well because there was one less middleman. And it doesn't always work this way, but yesterday it did. There was no other attorney that I had to interact with. It was direct. I could tell the buyer, I talked to the seller direct, and here's what I gleaned from that, and vice versa. And actually that helped. It helped a ton, because I do fear that if in that same deal, if there was another attorney, and there are good attorneys in town, it probably would have delayed closing. It wouldn't have gotten resolved as quickly as it did. Dad, what are your thoughts on that? How have you navigated that in the past?
I always tell, whether it's a seller or buyer, that I'm going to tell them the same thing as though the other person was in the room. I'm not going to sell my soul over one deal. It's going to be the truth. I'm being straight. And because I'm new to the equation, I don't have the emotional baggage necessarily with them. You know, they might have been frustrated with the other realtor over the course of a month or so, but they don't have as much of that with me. I can put it in perspective better because I don't have the same emotion associated with me. And, you know, rather than escrows, you know, I'll try to negotiate a credit, because, you know, having escrows, if you have a lender, you got to run it by the lender. And if a credit, you can do it closing costs usually. And I'll tell my buyer, you know, you can take this money, let's say it's a dishwasher. Say, how old is the dishwasher, Vinny? You know, and you can take this money and upgrade it, because God knows I wouldn't want an 8-year-old dishwasher. You know, I'll use myself as an example as much as possible, things I've done in my own home. But, you know, just telling them, you know, I haven't been in court in 20 years. I don't do that anymore. I used to do it. Litigation is a nightmare. There's hidden costs associated with it. And I'll use examples involving your mother and I and what we've done with our different legal experiences, and say, you don't know it, but this is not worth it. It really isn't.
Yeah.
And they believe it. You know?
I think I've had that conversation 3 times in the last 2 days. You know, I had a lawsuit that I was a part of over the last 5 years. It was a $65,000 claim. And at the end, even though we won, I wasn't happy about it. You know, we probably spent $50,000 in attorney's fees. It took 3 years and we still haven't gotten paid. It was a mess. So I like to, when I talk to clients about that, I want them to have that perspective. And I want them to just cut through it. All right, I know this isn't fair. It's not your fault. It is your problem. Let's deal with it. What are the solutions? And we try to normalize the feelings that they're feeling and give them options. But very rarely when you get to that point, should a deal fall apart without you trying everything. And we are one of those options for you. So get us involved. Let me know ahead of time. Text us, call us, come by. We're here every day. So that's sort of thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, the strategy and how you approach these people is hugely important. And the fact that we have litigation experience, even though we don't do it anymore, really helps, because we can talk about, you know, a few examples, and I have certain stock examples, and they're all real examples, but, you know, the cost of opportunity lost or the emotional trauma. I mean, I had an elderly couple and they got all excited over a repair that wasn't done correctly. And when I found out, it was the only time I asked the lady how old she was like 78. I said, do you really want to spend the next 3 years of your life litigating over a $5,000 issue? I mean, how much time is God given you? And is this worth it? You're going to be wound up for the next 3 years. Is it worth it? In the context, I know it's not fair. Life's not fair. But, we're good at calming them down because we've just done it a bunch.
That's right. We have, until we're not. I hope we'll always have success doing that. We had another deal yesterday. It should close tomorrow, actually, but there was one. There was a lot of personal items that were causing anxiety and stress in the agents, and that was kind of permeating between their relationship with each other and the clients. It was just getting to be. I think what was happening is that they were hitting their breaking point. And whenever you're trying to negotiate with someone that's already hit their breaking point, you just don't get the best of them. So if you recognize that in yourself or in one of the other agents, please get us involved, because we can circumvent that breaking point, because we didn't drive them to that point. We can be a fresh set of eyes, a fresh voice of reason. And so on that particular deal, there were a couple of items. It was supposed to be an as is. Buyer wasn't supposed to ask for anything, but the buyer was getting a loan. And because they're getting a loan, they needed insurance and they needed to kind of comply. So the buyer was almost obligated to ask for certain repairs. And the seller was like, I already talked about this. We're not doing repairs. And they couldn't communicate it properly. So when I got involved, I was able to explain, I know what they said, but this is a little bit out of their control. What can we do to kind of get them over the hump a little bit? Or we just say no, and you will risk losing the deal, because the buck stops here. This is a line in the sand for this buyer. And it's not necessarily because they want it to be, but because they're getting a loan. We have another client that is having a really hard time getting insurance, even though it's cash. And it's hard because he doesn't have many rights under the contract to require that he have insurance, but rationally it makes sense. He wants insurance. So all these things are different, and it just depends. If you're struggling to communicate well with your client or with the other party, please get us involved, because maybe we'll have an idea or suggestion. Well, I didn't mean for this to be as much of a sponsorship or an advertisement, but I hope that helps. We talked about several things, disclosures, how you market the property, what you put in MLS. I would say, be direct, be exact in what you're selling. If you're not selling a livable house, say that this house is not currently habitable. I think that could be helpful. I know it might be hard, get your client to sign off on it, but I think that's the right way to sell these deals. And then what should a buyer do when buying a property? They should ask every question from everybody. Can I do this? And we always used to use the idea of like a pool. I want a pool. Can I put a pool? Get that answered. And then when it goes down to repair and last minute things, how do we deal with it? What is our perspective? How can we help? We don't charge for those things. We just want to be a part of the deal. We want to earn your trust and your business. So thank you for joining. I'm really excited. If you want to watch any of these videos, I'm going to put the link in the comments. My channel is just youtube.com/Christian Ross, and you'll see all our videos. There are some videos that I did when I was in Georgia as well, that maybe you would enjoy watching. But if you have questions, please let us know. Dad, thank you. I appreciate it.